Hey, I've got a confession to make. I've never been especially successful with women, chatting them up, etc., etc. I know, it's difficult, indeed nigh on impossible to believe, but it is in fact true. A crippling lack of confidence and perilously little self-esteem has made it very difficult for me to approach women. Yes, it's frustrating at times, but my approach to it is to make efforts at self-improvement. Try and better myself so I can take these risks. But what I have never had, despite these annoying struggles, is an unshakable belief in my absolute and incontrovertible right to have a woman. Nor have I had any expectation that I have a right to sex whenever it suits me. The 21st century so far has seen a huge proliferation in incel or involuntary celibate culture. This poisonous and misogynistic subculture sees men who believe they cannot attract a sexual partner developing a seething resentment of women, and indeed also of sexually active men. A combination of jealousy and anger, with the bulk of the blame for this cauldron of despair placed firmly at the feet of all women. It is a member of this extremely dangerous subculture that we are focusing on today. As we travel to the southern coast of England to look at a tragic event where a licensed gun holder holding shotguns legally let this seething anger bubble over into a fury that would be directed towards his local community pretty much indiscriminately, with incredibly damaging and fatal consequences. This is Murder of Crows.
say that you're ready, but you won't like it. Silence all the crows, lining up in little rows. A sudden chill surrounds me. Silence all the crows, see come out and say you're old. A sudden chill.
Jake Davison was born on the 21st of August 1998 and had difficulties from an early age. He was diagnosed with autism and ADHD, and as a result attended the Mount Tamar School for Special Needs Children in Plymouth. There are, of course, challenges for any child with such a diagnosis, as they often take longer to understand themselves and develop coping strategies and ways to deal with the world. What it does not mean is that this diagnosis is a free pass to behave in any way they see fit. I only raise this now to avoid any thoughts that I may have mentioned his challenges as any kind of excuse for the abhorrent, detestable actions he goes on to commit later in his life. There is no excuse for the actions he chose to take. But even as a young child, he became obsessed both with firearms and pornography. Former school friends have described how Davison would brag about watching porn and then also run around the schoolyard pretending to shoot other pupils. So there were very much early warning signs of possible troublesome attitudes and behaviour forming in his young mind and his young presentation. In fact, around the age of probably 11 or 12, in early meetings with Career Southwest, an advisory service that Davis went on to use for several years, his complete obsession with guns was evident, with him professing a love of guns, a strong desire to join a gun club, and even wondering whether he could become a sniper. While there were moments of calm and pleasantness, including camping trips with siblings and cousins, his relationship with his mother continued to be fractious and volatile. A neighbour around that time noted that Davison had fallen out with his mother, and they frequently argued over his misogynistic views. The neighbour said, Maxine and Jake used to be so close. You'd always see him helping her with the shopping at Lidl, but they started to clash a lot. Jake was very quiet growing up. He was a troubled soul. He got into guns and he knew everything there was to know about them. When he was just 17 in 2016, his mother was so concerned with his obsession with firearms that she actually referred him to Prevent, which is an organisation designed to intervene with people who, if left unchecked, could go on to have terrorist leanings. Yet despite this, Davison was somehow approved to hold firearms the following year. There were serious failings with the firearms licensing body, and I'll discuss these in due course. But the granting of a gun license to this troubled young man was the first in a series of red flag behaviours that made Davison a ticking time bomb. In 2020, when he was aged 20, he began injecting steroids as part of a weight training regime that was seemingly designed to combat his perception of himself as being fat and ugly. He would drink up to 12 energy drinks a day and take additional supplements as part of this regime. Ironically, the steroids reduced his libido and led to him starting to develop breasts. In addition, his hair began to fall out. His mother would tell him to temper his efforts, which led to further antagonism between the two. By this time, he was working as an apprentice crane operator, but when not working, he would spend hours online. He would post in Reddit forums that discussed and praised incel culture, and his internet history made for extremely disturbing reading. In the subsequent police investigation, over 1.5 million files were recovered from the machine's 1.4 terabyte hard drive, and 57 were of shocking or unacceptable content. On the 16th of September 2020, Davison launched a ferocious, intense and unprovoked attack in a Plymouth skate park, punching a teenage boy 9 times before slapping a 15-year-old girl. However, under pressure not to send more cases to courts that were already overloaded due to the COVID pandemic, police instead put him through a deferred charge program called Pathfinder and a thinking skills course. Devon and Cornwall police quite rightly stripped Davison of his weapons and shotgun licenses after this alleged assault in September 2020, before obviously handing them back when he agreed to attend an anger management course, because of course they did. In April 2021, he posted a video about an assault he had carried out because somebody had called him fat, which hurt his ego. He stated this is why incels were more prone to killing themselves or going on a killing spree. At about this time, he also referred to the Californian man Elliot Rodger, a mass killer idolised by the incel community. Jesus Christ. In July 2021, the month before he did what he did, he filmed himself talking about his lack of success at dating apps, disillusionment of life, and self-hatred. He referred to himself as the black sheep of the family and described his mother as very difficult to live with. He expressed views that he had missed out on relationships, describing himself as a virgin, fucking fat, ugly. And at another point said, I like to think sometimes I'm the Terminator or something. Or in my view, Wreck-It Ralph with a beard. Also in that July, he looked up the 1987 Hungerford mass shootings in Berkshire that I previously covered on this channel, in which 16 people were killed. 3 days before the tragedy, he was searching for information about the US serial killer Ted Bundy and also other incel murderers. He watched videos of firearms and how to use them, and posted a clip from an online game called Killzone. After walking home from work on the afternoon of August the 12th, 2021, Davison used his computer to organise a parcels redelivery, book a driving theory test, and look at flats to rent. All pretty standard. But then all hell broke loose. This clip says what happened in the minutes that followed. Between 6:05 p.m. and 6:08 p.m, Davison opened fire with a legally owned pump-action shotgun, killing his mother inside her house on Biddick Drive. He then left the house with his shotgun in his hands. Then witnesses describe Davison firing upon a 3-year-old girl and her 43-year-old father in the street, killing them both. Next, he injured a 53-year-old woman and her 33-year-old son in a house on Biddick Drive, before shooting and killing a 59-year-old man in a nearby park. At 6:11 p.m, Devon and Cornwall police received reports of shots having been fired in multiple locations. Davison then moved on to Henderson Place, where he shot and fatally wounded a 66-year-old woman. He told a passing resident that there was nothing to worry about, mate. Shortly before killing himself, Davison was described as walking like he was on patrol, like a soldier with a gun, and with a blank expression. At 6:23 p.m, Davison shot himself on Henderson Place. In the immediate lead up to him doing this, he could be seen carrying the shotgun with the barrel wedged under his own chin. Jesus Christ on a bicycle.
Last night, police received multiple calls at 6:11 to an address in Biddick Drive. The number of calls were considerable and were assessed, and it was later revealed that shots were being fired. That, as I say, came in from multiple calls from the public. Officers arrived at the scene within 6 minutes, including both unarmed and armed officers. It is our understanding, and I can confirm, that a man known as Jake Davison, aged 22, had murdered a woman at an address in Biddick Drive using a firearm. I will not reveal that address, as we are still contacting the members of the family of the lady who has died. We will reveal that address later in more detail for you. Mr. Davison then left that address, entered Biddick Drive, where he immediately shot and killed a very young girl. He also shot and killed the male relative of that girl. This was a truly shocking event and was witnessed by members of the public. Further along Biddick Drive, he aimed and shot at 2 local residents, a man and a woman, who've received significant, but we understand at present not life-threatening injuries. They are currently being treated at a local hospital and supported by specialist officers. Again, there are witnesses to this. From there, Mr. Davison entered adjacent parkland, where he immediately shot a man who died at the scene. And thereafter, he moved to Henderson Place, where he shot a woman who, despite the best endeavours of first aiders at the scene, later died at Derriford Hospital. Eyewitnesses have told us that then Mr. Davison turned the gun upon himself, taking his own life. They have described that firearm as a pump-action shotgun. I can confirm that a firearm has been retrieved from that scene and will be forensically examined. We are not yet describing that as a pump-action firearm, but clearly, as I've said, multiple shots have been fired from a firearm during that 6-minute or so period.
Davison shot himself at the end of his rampage, so there would be no trial where the justice system could ensure that Davison would be punished for his unconscionable actions. It was left to the subsequent investigation and inquest to seek information and answers to the many questions that arose, the most pressing of which, certainly in the media, was Why was Davison given a firearm license, and why was he allowed to keep it with so many red flags in his behaviour? When the police searched the home that Davison shared with his mother, Maxine Davison, they found almost 400 of the type of buffalo cartridges normally bought to hunt large animals, and these were what he used during the 8-minute attack. These cartridges would have been completely unsuitable for the clay pigeon shooting Davison claimed was the reason that he had a shotgun. The inquest that followed analysed much of Davison's background and behaviour, including his online history. Recovered data showed Davison watched a YouTube video about US-based spree killer Elliot Rodger, who, as I said, is idolised by supporters of Incel culture. He also made references to the so-called black pill philosophy, described as a fatalistic view that a person's success with the opposite sex is determined at birth. Davison also uploaded videos to the internet in which he described himself as a virgin, fucking fat and ugly, and said his mother was a dirty, insufferable and vile creature. All of this coming from a man who looks like Wreck-It Ralph with a beard. Dominic Adamson, KC, representing 3 of the families who lost loved ones, said Davison's internet searches were remarkable and deeply disturbing. He said they suggested a man with extreme views who was not living in the real world. He added that Davison's internet history refers to violence, misogynistic views, and indicated an extremely hostile relationship between him and his mother. He had explored on numerous occasions mass killings and referred to people idolised in the incel community for perpetrating mass killings. When the inquest concluded, the jury found wide-ranging systemic failings in the national and local gun licensing process, which they described as catastrophic. Having found that each victim was unlawfully killed, the jury found that death was caused by the fact that the perpetrator had a legally, lawfully held shotgun. And the following contributed to this position. There were serious failures by Devon and Cornwall police firearms and explosives licensing unit, shortened to FELU, F-E-L-U, and failed to later revoke the perpetrator's shotgun certificate. In licensing the perpetrator to have a shotgun, there was a serious failure by Devon and Cornwall police to protect the deceased. There was a failure of Devon and Cornwall police to have in place safe and robust systems, foremost of which was the training of the FELU staff, governance of the FELU, quality assurance of FELU staff's decision making and ensuring decisions were made at the correct level. There was a failure by Devon and Cornwall Police's FELU staff to obtain sufficient medical information in respect of the perpetrator's application for a shotgun certificate. There was a failure again by the Firearms and Explosives Licensing Unit staff to properly seek out and consider all the relevant evidence and information available before deciding whether to grant the perpetrator a shotgun certificate. Following Davison having assaulted 2 children in 2020, there was a failure by Devon and Cornwall Police to protect the public and to protect the peace. Firstly, within the local investigation team regarding the unreasonable decision to charge the assault as battery, and secondly within the Firearms and Explosives Licensing Unit to sufficiently investigate whether it was safe to return the shotgun to Davison and reinstate his certificate after initially seizing it. Incorrect application of the force's risk matrix meant there was a serious failure by Devon and Cornwall Police to implement an adequate system to ensure that the decision whether or not to firstly grant or secondly return a shotgun certificate following review was made or approved by a manager of sufficient seniority. So, not looking good here, is it? A lack of national accredited firearms licensing training has and continues to fail to equip police staff to protect public safety. There was a catastrophic failure in the management of the Firearms and Explosives Licensing Unit, with a lack of managerial supervision and inadequate and ineffective leadership. This was compounded by a lack of senior management and executive leadership who failed to notice or address the issues. So a bit of a clusterfuck all round, really, where the Firearms and Explosives Licensing Unit were concerned, really. Much like the Hungerford massacre over 3 decades earlier, that Davison himself had looked at online, a licensed gun holder whose entitlement to hold that license had been questioned in advance of a tragic event. While no one can accurately predict when a person will snap and fly into a rage, there are things that can be done with respect to what those people legally have access to when that snap actually occurs. While changes to gun laws have limited the legal access to certain types of firearms like assault rifles, it still begs the question: has enough been done with respect to who can access firearms? Given the tragedies involving people who legally hold firearms continue to happen, it would appear not. Every system has its flaws, and there is no perfect process. But when these systems are determining who can own and use lethal weapons, there is an absolute duty by those providing these licenses to take every possible step in background checking regularly reviewing and monitoring those with licenses. Either that or scrap licenses altogether and make all firearms outside of law enforcement illegal. So in the space of a few minutes in August 2021, Jake Davison took 6 lives, including his own, while injuring 2 others. Other than himself, these people were complete innocents who were in the wrong place at the wrong time. This was a tragic and, in my view, preventable loss of life. With so many victims, the ripple effects of these traumatic losses would have been significant and far-reaching. This video is dedicated to Maxine Davison, who was 51, Lee Martin, who was 43, his daughter Sophie, who was just 3 years old, Stephen Washington, who was a carer and was 59 years old, and Kate Shepherd, who was an artist and was 66 years old. It's also dedicated to the friends and families of these victims who continue to grieve and try to move forward in the face of the traumatic losses. Thank you for watching another episode of Murder of Crows. I'm Steve. Samson's down there somewhere, lazing out. And I'll see you when I see you.
Leaving home after killing his mother with a loaded shotgun he should never have had. In August 2021, Jake Davison strolled the streets of Plymouth, killing his victims at random. They included 3-year-old Sophie Martin and her father Lee, along with Davison's mother Maxine, 59-year-old Stephen Washington and 66-year-old Kate Shepherd. Captured on CCTV with a gun under his chin, Davison then took his own life. 18 months on, an inquest jury has found how Devon and Cornwall police made catastrophic failures in granting Davison a shotgun certificate, which the victim's family say was essentially a licence to kill.
We will never be able to understand or comprehend why Davison did what he did. It was an act of pure evil. However, we now know that this evil act was facilitated and enabled by a series of failings and incompetence from the people and organisations that are supposed to keep us safe.
When 22-year-old Davison applied for a shotgun licence, he declared his autism and Asperger's, but police failed to get information from his GP. In September 2020, he brutally attacked a teenager in a skate park. Police investigating didn't know he had a shotgun licence. The officer was unaware. FC on the police database meant firearm certificate. His weapon was eventually taken away, but despite his history of violence and the fact his mother had tried to refer him to the anti-terrorism prevent scheme, his gun was handed back just 5 weeks before his shooting spree.
I am deeply sorry for the loss of those families and for the failings in my force that led to Jake Davison having a gun where he shouldn't have.
The force says the application process for a firearms licence has been reformed, but the issues highlighted in this inquest are more far-reaching. This is not just about failures in one force. The jury also found that a lack of training for firearms licensing officers was nationwide, putting public safety at risk. The police watchdog, the IOPC, has issued a series of recommendations to strengthen firearms licensing.
I think the bottom line, and we've said this for a long time now, is that the whole process of firearm licensing ought to be properly resourced. We need also to put shotguns, they're just as lethal, on the same par as as rifles.
A list of recommendations to police forces and the Home Office will be published in the coming days. But for the victims' families, this is yet again a case of too little too late. Dan Whitehead, Sky News, in Exeter.
Say that you're ready, but you won't like it, you say